So I've been doing this work now for several years, and what I have learned is that the skills required to develop good strategy are different than those skills required for successful execution. And there's a lot of research that bears this out. Executives struggle with bridging that strategy to execution. And the three biggest areas of concern are clarity of outcomes, leadership, and clear action plans. And those are the things that we'll be discussing today. So we're going to start, here we go. We're going to start by asking you a question, and you can respond on your phones. So every year, globally, we spend about $20 trillion a year on projects and transformational change. How much of this do you think is lost due to project failures? 500 million, 500 billion, or $2 trillion? You can answer by typing A, B, or C on your phones and pressing send. Go ahead and do that now. One person responded. Do we have other responses? If you haven't initiated the poll tool, you have to do that text up above on your phone. Two responses. Do we have more? Looks like we have 4 responses. Any others? I'll wait another couple of seconds. Okay, so I'll assume that people are either struggling with this tool or don't have a cell phone handy. The correct answer is $2 trillion. So out of that $20 trillion, we lose about 10% due to project or transformational project failure. We'll talk more about that in a minute. So the next question is, what is the success rate? So if there's 100 projects or 100 transformational projects, what percent is successful? Is it 0 to 20%, 20 to 40, 40 to 60, 60 to 80, or 80 to 100? So you can enter A, B, C, D, E, or F and press send. How many projects, how many transformational projects are successful? Somebody asked, what's the criteria for success? The criteria is, did the project or did the transformation meet all of the objectives that that it set out to accomplish? Wait another second or two. Okay, so this is a smart group. The answer is actually 33%. Now I have to tell you that I've read lots of studies, and this number is all over the place. This particular study was one that was completed in 2016, looked to be fairly comprehensive, and it's shared in one of the HBR articles that I'll tell you about at the end. So roughly only 1/3 of projects are successful. Now, that doesn't mean that 67% are total failures. It means that 67% have not achieved one or more of the objectives that they set out to do. And that loss equates to about $2 trillion a year, which is what we talked about in the last poll. So, so something to bear in mind. And I'm having a little trouble advancing, sorry. Okay, so some additional facts and figures that really bear out my experience that I'd like to share with you quickly. And again, this is all included in documentation I'll share at the end. First, 61% of executives said that they were not well prepared for the strategic challenges that they faced when they started their role. And more than half actually failed to achieve their objectives within the first 18 months of being promoted or hired into their role. So this whole idea of bridging strategy to execution is very important for individual leadership success. Further, executives or leaders spend only 70% spend an average of 1 day reviewing their strategy. Most of the rest of the time they're focused on tactical issues or fighting fires and that sort of thing. So while 70% is a good number, I'm not sure that 1 day is really sufficient, especially at the executive level. 85% of leadership teams spend less than an hour per month discussing strategy, which just exacerbates this issue of bridging strategy to execution. And further, they don't link their strategies to a budget. So, you know, obviously, in order to execute the strategy, you have to have resources to do that. If the budget isn't established linked to that strategy, it's just another element of, it's just another gap in that gap. It's just another gap between strategy and execution, sorry. So, and conversely, successful companies, first, they limit the number of strategic initiatives. I'm sure all of you have heard at one time or another, there's too many things going on, we're not sure what the priorities are, there's too many top priorities, we're burned out, we have change fatigue. Successful companies limit the number of strategic initiatives. They build their budget around strategy. So they understand what it's going to take to execute and be successful. And then finally, they put operational mechanisms in place to execute the strategy and monitor day-to-day progress. So whether this be metrics that they cascade through the organization, maybe they have some sort of a PMO, project management office, or a TMO, transformation management office, to guide the day-to-day execution of the strategy. They have some sort of operational mechanism in place to help drive the execution and bridge that gap. So, again, what I have learned is that to bridge strategy to execution, you really need to activate and accelerate your strategy. Today, we're going to focus on clear purpose, aligned leaders, and enrolled employees. But you really can't, and this is more what I consider to be structural elements. Accelerating is more a behavioral thing. You really can't separate these, but in the interest of time, we're going to focus on the structural elements, and we'll sprinkle in some of the behavioral pieces as we go through this. I think you'll be able to tease those out. So again, to activate and accelerate your strategy requires, number one, clear purpose with clear outcomes to really fuel your transformation. Coalition building to align leaders around that purpose. and understanding what those outcomes are within each leader's respective function. And then finally, enrolling employees to actually drive the implementation. The more that employees are involved in actually driving the implementation, the greater the probability is that you'll have a successful, sustainable, long-term solution. And we will dive into each of those in more detail. First, we'll talk about clear purpose with clear outcomes. And so there's sort of this dichotomy, right? So without clear purpose, not only are employees confused, but leaders can be confused as well. They might each have their own agenda. There's often multiple conflicting priorities. Clearly, there's lack of direction. People work on their own things. They're not terribly coordinated, and it's unfocused. And as a result, costs increase. Cost could be time, cost could be resources beyond time. It takes longer to achieve results, or it takes more people to get things done. With clear purpose and clear outcomes, you have clear direction. People understand what the outcomes are. They're better able to sort the priorities. It actually streamlines the work of the organization, focuses people to do what needs to be done and not a lot of spurious activities, tangential activities going on. So it drives to tangible results that affect your transformation, and as a result of all of this, drives greater alignment, both within your leadership team, but of course throughout the organization. So clear purpose with clear outcomes is very important. I'll share a couple of examples. First, here's a mission statement, and by the way, I use the term mission and purpose somewhat interchangeably. I actually don't like the term mission statements. I think it's a little vague. I prefer purpose because I think that's much clearer. So here's an example of a mission statement. Company X provides its customers quality office and information technology products, future printing values, and the expertise required for making informed buying decisions. I don't know about you, but I find this very confusing. I don't think it's clear. I think it's too long. And I'm really not sure what it is they do. Are they providing products and products, office and IT products, or are they providing a service to help me make better decisions? It's really not very clear. Now, to be completely fair and totally transparent, this is the mission statement for that fictional company, Dunder Mifflin, from the TV show The Office. And we know that they take great pride in poking fun at businesses for some of the crazy things that businesses do. But I will tell you, in practice, I've seen lots of mission statements that leave me scratching my head and aren't terribly clear. So I think, again, keep it short, right? So here's an example, and this is a real example. Create the largest home appliance company in the world. Now, you need a little context for this. This was a purpose statement created for internal use at Whirlpool Corporation several years ago when they acquired Maytag. It was the largest merger in appliance industry history, and the leadership of Whirlpool wanted to make sure that employees were really clear on what it is we were trying to do to bring these two companies together and to do it quickly. I could spend an hour telling you about just that one activity alone. But at any rate, they created this internally used purpose statement to really help employees understand what it is we were trying to do. And I was there, and I found this very energizing and very inspiring. So very clear, short, you understood what the outcome of this was going to be. No question about it. Here's another. Every engagement counts. And again, context is required. This, again, was an internally focused purpose statement for an organizational consolidation that took place at one of my clients. And the background was that they were bringing together disparate teams that had, in many cases, were improperly led prior to this integration. And many of the frontline employees were feeling very disenfranchised and undervalued. And morale was very low. And after the new leadership team came together, and I'll share more about that in another example here in a few minutes, but after that leadership team came together and really try to understand a big part of the purpose of bringing that team together, they came up with this: every engagement counts, to help that front line really understand that the work they did interacting with customers was extremely important, in that every one of those engagements, whether it was with a customer or a peer, was very important to the success of the organization. So again, short and inspirational. It had the desired effect. And I'll share more about that later. So there are a few examples, and I want to just share quickly. How do you make this happen? How do you define clear purpose? So what I do when I bring client teams together, client leadership teams together, one of the exercises that we go through is to define clear purpose is we actually talk about what are the outcomes we expect to achieve longer term, 5 years out. Now 5 is a bit arbitrary, but the point is, where do we want to be? What do we want to achieve? What are our outcomes longer term? That exercise tends to start to bring people together and align their thinking around shorter term, right? So the second box. What are the outcomes of the specific transformation that we're working on right now in the planning horizon of that transformation? Usually in the work that I've done, it's 18 to 24 months. And so by doing the 5-year version first, it starts to align them and get the language together so that when they start talking about the outcomes of the specific transformation, number one, it's faster, and number two, it drives more clarity more quickly. So in this process, we ensure that the outcomes are meaningful and relatable, not just to the leadership team, but I ask them to think about, how is this going to land on employees? What are they going to be able to do as a result of this? Is it relatable to them? And of course, this exercise requires that they challenge each other to drive to that clarity. So open, honest communication is required in order to achieve that goal. So and this could be a very short exercise. We can do this in a couple of hours at most. And we have a pretty clear outcome or purpose statement. Then we put it aside. I ask them to put it aside for a week or so, and then come back, look at it again, make sure it's clear, or is there any confusion, and then tweak as appropriate. I have to tell you that every time that I've done this, it certainly drives a lot more clarity and helps the leadership team align, which is the next thing we're going to talk about. So once you have that clear purpose in place with clear outcomes, you're in a much better position to align your leadership team. and build that coalition of sponsorship that's required for successful execution. Okay, so without alignment, you have these things on the left. You have what I call cross-functional dysfunction. People in one area or one function doing things that may be at odds or not completely aligned with what's going on in other functions, right? You have conflicting goals. Oftentimes, we set goals at the senior level that inspire competition between functions as opposed to cooperation. And I think cooperation is going to help you achieve your transformation results much more quickly. It also results in employees being at odds with each other, lacks cooperation, and hampers speed to results. With alignment, you have clear expectations across the organization. Some of that, of course, comes from having clear purpose with clear outcomes. Employees have a common target across functions, right? They know what they're trying to accomplish. They are able to reduce the conflict between teams. It enables greater cooperation. And the bottom line results are you achieve what you're trying to do faster and mitigate failure as a result of things going slower or not achieving the results that you're trying to achieve. Okay, so I want to share with you a case study where we did this, and this is where that purpose statement, every engagement counts, came from. This was a pharma client that I worked with a couple years ago where they had their U.S. Medical Affairs organization was, before this restructuring, they were kind of spread around the organization. There wasn't common leadership. The field team, the MSLs, medical science liaisons, were disenfranchised, undervalued, and so there was a lot of confusion and lack of alignment. So there was an organizational decision to put a senior VP in place over the medical affairs function. He brought all the therapeutic areas together under his leadership, as well as the field team together. The therapeutic areas were located at corporate headquarters. They were responsible for the science, or the what, whereas the MSLs in the field were responsible for the engagement, engagement with other functions in the company, but more importantly, engagement with physicians and pharmacists and nurse educators and other customers in the field. And they were responsible for how the medical information, if you will, was communicated and worked with at the field level. So bringing this group on the left together wasn't as easy as bringing, creating a new org chart and having people report differently. There were a lot of preconceived notions. There were a lot of the senior leaders under this vice president had their own ideas about how they should be organized and what they should do, and so it took some effort to bring this group together. And so this vice president, I worked with him. We did a number of workshops over a few months to really help this team come together, to coalesce, right? To be truly an integrated, aligned leadership team. And the first thing we had to do is get beyond this thing I call inquiry versus advocacy. There was a lot of advocacy going on early on, right? Well, I think the team should be organized this way, and here's why. And there wasn't a lot of listening going on. And so we had to change that, right, and get these leaders to start asking each other questions about why they felt the way they did. So rather than advocating a position, started asking each other questions about what had to be different and why they felt the way they did. And in this process, we also learned that, we had to build some trust. Now, it wasn't that they didn't trust each other, but, again, they were coming together from a disparate background, and so they had to learn how to work together and learn how to engage in healthy conflict. And some of the results were pretty immediate. Within 45 days, there were people outside this organization commenting on, geez, you guys are coming together quickly. Looks like you're making some great progress. And then we were able to put that clear purpose statement together about every engagement counts. And we were able to rally that leadership team around that, and that, of course, cascaded down through the organization. So we had a very well-aligned leadership team as a result of this work, and that resulted in some very tangible results. Attrition reduced, so unfavorable attrition reduced from 16% to 2% in less than 2 years. Employee engagement scores more than doubled in the same period. Very significant increase in engagement scores. And as a result of this improvement, the leadership of this organization was able to achieve a 25% increase in budget and headcount because they were doing much better, more effective work. They were able to turn around that disenfranchised, underappreciated frontline team and make them far more productive and execute their transformation successfully and speedily, I might add. So a common denominator on this is, how do we actually align leaders? How do we do that? So what I have found very effectively, and this is a bit of a generic approach, you have to tweak it a little bit, but this is really the underpinnings. So number one, so there's really two major activities. The first one is we ask each leader and his or her respective team to define how that transformation is going to impact them and their team. How is it going to impact them? What's going to be different? And then we ask them, in terms of pre-work, to also determine how they think the transformation will impact their peers, upstream and downstream. So, simple example. If the order processing folks are going to change the way they process orders, that's a bit technical, but if they're going to change the way they process orders, what's the impact on production? What's the impact on distribution? What's the impact on accounts receivable? So think through that. If you're talking about a cultural change, if you're going to drive more teamwork in your function or across the organization, what does that mean to your team? And how does that impact how you work together upstream and downstream, as an example? So we do that pre-work, and then we bring the leaders together, and sometimes they'll bring some of their staff, and we do a round robin to discuss each team's pre-work. And this is always a very rich discussion about driving to clarity. Well, if you do this, then it means this to me, or it means this to my other peers, right? Having that discussion across the functions is very rich, and it always flushes out actions, risks, and issues that need to be followed up and addressed. So that's the last thing then, right? Add those to the project plan. Make sure people are held accountable to actually drive those actions to completion, mitigate the risks, resolve the issues. So not only is the work of figuring out what those impacts is going to be, not only is that important, but so is the follow-up, right? So there's an execution piece here that's very important. Lastly, we'll talk about enrolling employees to drive the implementation and the sustainability. So if employees aren't on board, if they're not enrolled in what it is you're trying to do, there's going to be a significant lack of commitment to achieve the goals that you've set out to achieve. The risk of high resistance is much greater. We'll talk about resistance a little bit more in a moment. But, you know, employees end up doing their own thing, right? If they're not enrolled, they're going to keep doing what it is they've been doing, sort of oblivious to what's going on. And they might feel put upon. It's like, oh, here we go again. Here's another change, flavor of the month, right? You've heard it all. But most importantly, this transformation doesn't stick. It's not sustainable. People are unable to make it work in the long term. With enrollment, and I think this is very important, employees actually drive the execution, not you. So as a leader, you have less to do from an execution perspective, but you have more to do from a leadership perspective, leading that change, helping employees become enrolled, helping them overcome obstacles. So your role as a leader increases, but hey, that's what you were hired for. Employees own the change. It's easier to overcome resistance. You drive cross-functional work, and you have a much greater probability of sustainability, right? So back on that cross-functional work topic for a moment, you know, we talked about driving cross-functional work at a leadership level a minute ago when we were talking about coalition building across the leadership team. Well, that'll cascade down to the employees. They need to figure out also how to work together more effectively. And that all drives greater probability of sustainability, which is what you're ultimately looking for. If you're going through all this effort to execute your strategy, you want to make sure that whatever it is you're doing works in the long run. So I want to take a moment and talk about resistance. Now, I'm talking about it here at the employee level, but look, resistance can happen at any level. But let's talk about it. So resistance, in my opinion, it's not only good, it's necessary. And here's why. As a leader, you don't necessarily know every nuance of everything that's going on in the organization. You might overlook something. That's only natural, especially as you increase your leadership responsibility and you take on, a greater scope of work. So resistance is good. It can help you tease out areas where you may have missed something, or you may have some nuance that might be off a bit. So let's talk for a minute about how do you mitigate it. So mitigating resistance is key to success, right? And I'll share this formula with you through an example. I had a large client several years ago. It was a community college where we implemented a very massive transformation. It was going to affect all the students, about 30,000 students, all of the faculty, roughly 2,000 of them, and most of the administrative staff of about 300 people. So early on, it was very easy to identify where there was resistance. The faculty was dead set against this. They came up with every reason in the book not to do this. So we knew, conversely, we had to have them on our side, if you will, to make this successful. So the senior sponsor and I, we went to the faculty union presidency. We went to one of their meetings and basically did a listening session. Help us understand what your concerns are about this change, about this transformation. This was not the place to tell them to advocate for the transformation. The last thing they wanted to hear was an advertisement about how great this was going to be. So, so this was about asking questions, not telling. It was about inquiry, not advocacy. Through this process, we spoke with them for 45 minutes to an hour, we identified a number of issues and concerns. And as this started, the first little bit, some of it was sour grapes, but we continued to listen to them, and we teased out a number of issues and concerns that were legitimate. And in one case, had we not known about it or addressed it, it would have created an opportunity for significant failure. So two of those issues that we teased out, one was the faculty was concerned about their technology platform and would it allow them to do the work that was necessary as a result of this transformation. We hadn't surfaced that before, and that needed to be addressed. And the other concern was that they didn't feel heard. They didn't feel listened to. And so the next step was to actually follow through on this. And this is where you build credibility, right? And it's very important. So following through on those issues and concerns. Don't just take down the list and don't do anything with it. In the case of the technology platform issue, we went back to the IT department, surfaced some issues, and then they actually added an extra work stream to the project plan to address this. In the case of being heard, we went back to the chancellor and said, look, part of what they want is just to make sure that they have an audience with you and that they're heard and that they know people are concerned about their real risks and issues. So we did that. We very quickly pulled together a meeting with the chancellor, the senior sponsor, a few members of the faculty union leadership team, and I facilitated the discussion, and we went out of there basically reinforcing the issues and concerns we had before with a commitment to make sure that they were addressed. And we did. And then finally, once we got through that resistance piece, if you will, we enrolled them to enable the transformation. We put together faculty business readiness teams. I'll talk more about that in a minute. But we put together these faculty teams to actually drive the implementation in each of the colleges. And as a result, really, I believe, of addressing their concerns, the faculty implementation was one of the most successful of the entire transformation. So I think this is a very powerful tool that you can use. So how do you enroll employees? Number one, provide a great deal of two-way communication. I sat in a face-to-face meeting of one executive once who did a 1-hour face-to-face meeting. He spent 59 minutes on his own talking about, and I'm serious, it was 59 minutes. I'm not making that up. He spent 59 minutes talking about the transformation and how things are going to be different and why it was great. And then at the end, he allowed 1 minute for questions. Not terribly effective. Conversely, another example, I worked with a senior executive who was going through a massive transformation, and he held a meeting with his entire organization every week. The first few minutes, he talked about what was going on from his perspective, and then he turned it back over to the team and let them ask questions. And not only did he let them ask questions, he asked questions of them. This is that inquiry, if you will. He asked questions of them to spur dialogue. So he would ask questions like, so how is this going to land on you? What is the impact to you? What is the impact to our customers, our suppliers, other functions that we work with? What do you think the risks are? What concerns do you have that might keep us from being successful? So he asked specific, pointed questions to tease out other questions and other dialogue to help really engage and enroll the employees. So the second item, creating functional business readiness teams. We talked about this a little bit with the faculty, right? But organizing employees by their functional teams with appropriate leadership to really tease out the impacts and how to address them directly. Great fodder for this work is the work that we did identifying cross-functional risks and issues as we were aligning leaders in the last segment, right? This just takes it a step further and puts it in real terms for frontline employees. The other thing we do, item 3 here, is create a cross-functional team. There's a lot of names for this. Might be change champions. I like the term change action network. This is a group of employees across the organization, typically frontline, again, with the appropriate leadership and sponsorship to spur the discussion and go into another layer of detail to ensure that changes in one area are considered as changes are made in other areas, right? So again, creating that forum across the organization for people to speak with one another and actually execute the strategy and implement the changes that they want to do. So this all goes to the fourth point, which is really enrolling employees to define those impacts within their teams and across teams to make sure that whatever the impacts, whatever the outcomes of the transformation are, that they are understood and dealt with at that front line. And then again, we make sure that those components are added to the project plan, right? And that people are held accountable to make sure that those impacts are addressed, resistance is mitigated, other issues are mitigated. So that's it. Activating your strategy requires clear purpose with clear outcomes. It really fuels your transformation. It brings people together, helps them understand what's required. It is the first step in aligning leaders, building that coalition, and helping to understand what the impacts are in each area and across areas. And then finally, enrolling employees to actually execute. Again, putting the implementation in their hands makes it more sustainable in the long run. So with that, I will take questions. I will unmute the phone. I will attempt to unmute the phone. So you're free to ask questions either by voice or you can do it online in the chat box at the top.
Well, Steve, I have one. This is Bruce.
Yes.
And at the very beginning, the idea of getting the purpose clear, I find many clients are sort of in a bind between making a clear purpose that might not hold up.
Okay, where are you?
Okay, we got too many people talking. Bruce has the floor, please. Go ahead, Bruce.
I'll step back a little bit. The challenge of getting a purpose that's both clear and relevant.
Unit 107, is that Scottsdale or Phoenix?
I'm sorry, Bruce. Yeah.
The key challenge
what is 1077, the unit number?
Okay, there's somebody else that's on the call that's having another conversation. Can we put that on hold, please? Go ahead, Bruce.
Okay. And you don't have car keys or anything?
Yeah, I think there's still a problem.
And the HOA for the unit doesn't have extra keys,
maybe,
I suppose,
maybe
right?
you could mute all, Steve.
Yeah,
and,
maybe I'll type it.
So go ahead, Bruce. If you can type that in, that would be good. Sorry about that. While you're typing that in, oh, there we go. How to get a purpose is clear and relevant. Well, I think how to get a purpose that's clear and valid in a changing situation. So I think in my experience and in my opinion, I think this goes back to a couple of things. One is, do you have too many things going on, right? And what are the priorities? So, you know, let's get clear first on what it is we're trying to accomplish. So I think there might be some conflicting priorities there that need to get clear first. And then I think the other thing is, and I actually I could spend an hour talking about this. It's how do you establish, how do you have an organization that can, you know, in this era of digital transformation, right, where change is constant, how do you have an organization that can continually change and, you know, adapt quickly? Let's stop having these 3-year transformation projects and have something that's a little more iterative. Let's see, one part is who is on defining the purpose. Yeah, so, right. You know, do you have the right leadership team focused on doing this? I've seen organizations, you know, going into this activity that aren't completely aligned on who's leading what. So there's some parts around clarity there that need to be established even before you go into these exercises. So I trust that answers your question. How to define if the purpose needs refinement? Well, I think, you know, what I mentioned is, the number one at the beginning, make sure that you have, make sure that it's clear at the front end, put it aside for a few days and come back. Now, as you go into execution, Sylvina, this is a great question, as you go into execution, how will you know if that purpose needs refinement? Well, I think that's one of the benefits of listening to the people that are resistors, right? You may have to go back and tweak your purpose a little bit. Or the purpose as it relates to outcomes in each of the functional areas may need to be touched on, may need to be touched up. So I think listening to the employees, understanding resistance, going through the process of aligning your leadership, I think all of those things could help you define if the purpose needs refinement. I want to go back and answer Paul's question that was earlier. Besides meeting objectives, doesn't the success mean that changes were sustained over a reasonable period of time? I think I answered that through the presentation. I think Paul asked this at the beginning. But yes, definitely, this is all about sustainability, because if whatever you're doing isn't sustained, then long-term you're not going to achieve the results that you were looking for. All right. Are there any other questions? I have just a couple other things I want to share with you, and I'll be quick about it so we can end on time. Any other questions, though? Okay, let's go here. Well, is there an example question to ask about purpose? So that's a great question. Is there an example question to ask about purpose? You know what? When I run my workshops with my clients, when we do that 5-year out exercise, you know, the question I ask very simply is, what do you want this to look like 5 years from now? What outcomes will you be producing in 5 years that are different than today, right? So that's an example question. Trust. So Paul asked, trust, how to build it when you don't have it. Seems like it takes a lot of time and effort. So it can, and I've done this with several teams, and I have some exercises that we work through. Does it work 100% all the time? No. I mean, we're talking about people and personalities, but I do have exercises, and I'd be happy to share those maybe offline that I work through with leadership teams to help drive that trust. Sometimes we look at personality profiles like Myers-Briggs, that sort of thing. But sometimes it takes a lot of time and effort, but sometimes it's pretty quick. I think it depends somewhat on how much the leader is, really vested to make it happen. Last question, because I want to wrap this up. What are some of the essentials that our customers come to us for? I'm not sure I understand that question. What are... Yeah, that's... Oh, I see. Okay, yeah, great comment. Great comment. So, Bruce says, I'm not sure if you can see this or not, but so Bruce said one of the questions is, for one of the purpose questions might be, what are some of the things that customers come to us for? I think it's a good question. I might phrase that a little bit differently. As a result of this transformation, what will they come to us for differently than what they come to us for today? Or that wasn't very well worded, but you get it. Okay, I need to move on and close out. I want to share a couple really quick things with you. Patrick Lencioni is a guy that I just love. I've read just about all of his books, probably all of his books. A couple of years ago, he came out with this book called The Ideal Team Player. And what it gets to is characteristics you want to hire for. So for example, you might want to hire a finance manager. And you expect that finance manager to be able to do income statements and balance sheets, right? Those are the technical elements of the job. And what Lencioni says is beyond those technical elements, you need these three important characteristics. And I think these characteristics go to your ability to be successful with what we just spent the last hour talking about. First, you want employees who are hungry, right? They're willing to go above and beyond. They're passionate about what they do. If they need to put in a few extra hours, they do. And I'm not advocating, workaholism, but when duty calls, they do it. Second, they're humble. They, it's not about them. They admit when they made an error, but they also share success across the team. They take credit as a team and not as an individual. And then finally, they have emotional intelligence, right? They know how to interact with people. They know how to read body language. They know how to interact effectively with other people beyond just day-to-day language. Great book. You can read this book on a flight from Chicago to LA. It's like a 3 to 4 hour read. If you've read any of his work, you know it's very well written. So I highly recommend it. A couple other things quickly, because I know we're at the end. If you do not already, please sign up for my newsletter. I publish a newsletter every Thursday addressing some element of the topics we've just talked about for the last hour. So please sign up for the newsletter. If you are a leader and would love to be featured in one of my newsletters, I'd love to have an interview with you. So just drop me an email. And then please like my Facebook page and follow me on LinkedIn. When you receive the presentation, you will have access to all of these links, some really great information here. And finally, I want to thank you for taking this hour out of your day. I trust that this was of value to you. Just a reminder, This session has been recorded. It will be posted on my website for you to have access to along with the presentation. There are a couple of assessments out there that you might find interesting and valuable to help you identify the complexity of the change and determine your personal readiness to lead change. I will also send out a brief survey, and candidly, I'm looking for your feedback on messaging my work and exploring how I might be able to help you further. So with that, activating your strategy execution is an investment that will pay off and enable you to achieve greater success sooner. And again, thank you. Let's see, we had a couple of questions. Nope, that's it. Thank you. Have a great day.